June 23, 1941, 0530 hours. Near the Dubysa River, Lithuania, the rising sun struggles to pierce the thick, choking veil of dust that hangs suspended over the gravel road, kicked up by thousands of churning tank treads. Unteroffizier Hans Weber leans out of the commander's hatch of his Panzer 35 tons, his goggles coated in a fine layer of grey grit, squinting against the golden glare of the eastern horizon. The air smells of diesel fumes, unwashed bodies, and the pine forests that line the route. But beneath the mechanical roar of the division on the move, there is a strange, unsettled silence from the woods. The ground beneath the tracks vibrates with a rhythm that feels different today, heavier and more ominous than the triumphant march through France just a year prior. The German war machine is in full swing, executing the opening moves of Operation Barbarossa with terrifying efficiency and speed that has stunned the world. Kampfgruppe Raus, a powerful battle group of the 6th Panzer Division, is pushing hard toward the Dubysa River with orders to seize the crossings and open the road to Leningrad. The men are confident, fueled by the propaganda of invincibility and the easy victories of the past 2 years, believing that the Soviet Union is a rotting structure that will collapse with a single kick. They drive captured Czech-made tanks which are light, agile, and reliable. But their confidence blinds them to a critical reality regarding the enemy they are about to wake. General Erhard Raus commands this spearhead from his mobile headquarters, studying maps that are proving to be dangerously inaccurate regarding the local terrain. The intelligence briefings assured him and his officers that the Red Army possessed only obsolete, light armor that would crumble before the German blitzkrieg tactics. Reports spoke of T-26 seconds and BT-7 seconds, tanks with paper-thin armor that could be penetrated by the standard 37mm anti-tank guns issued to Raus's men. The mood among the command staff is one of professional urgency rather than fear, as they coordinate the movement of fuel trucks, infantry half-tracks, and artillery pieces along the narrow, singular roads that snake through the dense Baltic forests. Suddenly, the radio network crackles into chaotic life, shattering the monotonous drone of the engines with panicked voices screaming from the vanguard positions. Reconnaissance units pushing across the river have made contact with a massive Soviet counterattack, but the reports coming back sound like hallucinations rather than military updates. Frantic tank commanders are shouting about steel monsters that refuse to stop, machines so large they dwarf the German panzers like wolves surrounding a bear. Raus listens intently to the transmission, his brow furrowing as he hears the distinct, terrifying sound of fear in the voices of veteran soldiers who have never before flinched in the face of enemy fire. Out on the battlefield, the dust cloud parts to reveal the source of the terror, emerging from the tree line like prehistoric beasts rising from the earth. These are not the flimsy light tanks the Germans were promised, but the Kliment Voroshilov series, the KV-1 and the gargantuan KV-2, heavily armored giants that German intelligence had completely failed to identify. The KV-1's second move with a menacing, grinding weight, their thick armor plates gleaming in the morning light, immune to the frantic fire coming from the German lines. But it is the KV-2 that truly stops the breath in the throats of the German gunners, a machine that looks less like a tank and more like a mobile fortress designed to crush the world. The KV-2 is a towering absurdity of engineering, featuring a box-like turret that stands nearly impossible high, housing a massive 152mm howitzer intended for destroying concrete bunkers. It lumbers forward slowly, its high silhouette making it an easy target. But as the German shells strike it, they simply shatter harmlessly against the steel hide. Inside the German Panzer 35 tons S, gunners frantically load and fire their 37mm cannons, watching in horror as the tracers streak toward the Soviet behemoth, only to bounce off into the sky like sparks from a grinding wheel. The realization hits the German crews with the force of a physical blow. Their weapons are utterly useless against this new enemy. Panic begins to ripple through the German formation as the Soviet heavy tanks roll directly through the defensive lines, crushing anti-tank guns beneath their wide tracks. One German crew manages to land a direct hit on the turret of a KV-2 from less than 100 meters away, a range that should guarantee a kill. Instead, the Soviet turret slowly rotates toward them. The massive barrel of the 152mm howitzer, leveling out with terrifying deliberation. The ensuing explosion obliterates the small Czech tank instantly, sending a plume of black smoke and debris hundreds of feet into the air, signaling to everyone nearby that the rules of engagement have fundamentally changed. The terrain around Raseiniai transforms into a chaotic slaughterhouse as the 6th Panzer Division scrambles to find a way to halt the iron tide. Infantrymen dive into ditches, clutching magnetic mines and satchel charges, realizing that their standard rifles and machine guns are mere toys in this environment. The Soviet tanks, however, suffer from their own issues, primarily a lack of radio coordination and poor visibility, causing them to fight as isolated juggernauts rather than a cohesive unit. Despite these tactical flaws, their sheer physical invulnerability creates a psychological crisis for the Germans, who have never encountered an enemy they could not kill. General Raus receives report after report of his anti-tank batteries being overrun, his light tanks being swatted aside, and his advance stalling completely. The 37mm door knockers, as the troops have started to bitterly call their anti-tank guns, are proving to be a liability rather than a defense. He orders the 88mm flak guns, usually reserved for anti-aircraft duties, to be brought forward and leveled against the ground targets. This is a desperate improvisation, a tactic born of necessity, as only the high-velocity heavy shells of the 88mm seem capable of scratching the paint of the Voroshilov tanks. Amidst this clash of titans, the confusion of the melee allows individual units to become separated and isolated in the dense, swampy terrain. The battle becomes a series of disjointed duels, with German agility and communication pitted against the raw, brute strength of the Soviet steel. The dust and smoke act as a fog of war, obscuring vision and leaving tank commanders to make split-second decisions based on the terrifying glimpses of heavy armor moving through the haze. It is in this environment of disorder that the legend of a single tank crew begins to take shape. A crew that decides to hold their ground not as part of a grand maneuver, but as a singular point of defiance, a lone KV-2, separated from its main company, possibly due to mechanical trouble or fuel shortages, rumbles away from the main engagement area. Its commander, whose name remains lost to the chaos of history, but whose actions would become immortal, spots a strategic opportunity that could bleed the German division dry. The tank navigates the boggy ground, its engine roaring with the effort of moving 52 tons of steel, and heads toward a crucial crossroads near the village of Raseiniai. This position is vital, serving as the only supply artery for the advanced German battle group that has managed to cross the river. The crew inside the KV-2 works in cramped, sweltering conditions, the air thick with the smell of cordite and engine oil. They are aware of their isolation, cut off from their lines with no hope of resupply or reinforcement. Yet they position their massive vehicle deliberately. They park the tank on the high ground overlooking the road, the massive turret traversing to cover the asphalt strip that cuts through the green fields. From this vantage point, they command the landscape, a silent sentinel waiting for the inevitable flow of German logistics to arrive. Back at the river crossing, the German vanguard believes they have weathered the worst of the storm, having pushed back the main Soviet thrust through sheer tactical superiority. They are low on ammunition, critically low on fuel, and possess a large number of wounded men who need to be evacuated to the rear. They radio for the supply column to move forward immediately, expecting a clear run along the road they secured just hours ago. The trucks, loaded with fuel drums and ammunition crates, begin their engine ignition sequences, the drivers unaware that the road ahead is no longer theirs. The sun climbs higher in the sky, baking the Lithuanian countryside and heating the armor plates of the waiting KV-2 until they are hot to the touch. The Soviet crewmen peer through their narrow vision slits, scanning the horizon for the telltale dust cloud of a convoy. They check their ammunition stores, counting the massive 152mm shells and the drums of machine gun rounds, knowing that every single shot will have to count. There is a heavy, stoic resolve in the metal belly of the beast, a silent agreement among the men that they will not move from this spot until they are dead or the war is over. As the first distant rumble of the German supply trucks echoes through the valley, The loader slides a high-explosive shell into the breech of the howitzer. The metallic clang of the breech block locking into place sounds like the tolling of a bell, a finality that marks the beginning of a siege within a battle. The German division, focused on the massive conflict ahead, has completely missed the single, solitary threat behind them, a mistake that is about to cost them dearly in blood and time. The monster of Raseiniai is awake, it is watching, and it is ready to close the trap. The strategic situation for the 6th Panzer Division has become precarious by the afternoon of June 23rd, transforming their rapid advance into a potential logistical nightmare. General Erhard Raus and his Kampfgruppe have successfully punched a hole through the initial Soviet defenses, establishing a bridgehead across the Dubisa River. But this success has come at a significant cost in fuel and ammunition. The armored spearhead is like a diver operating deep underwater, reliant entirely on a single, thin air hose that stretches back to friendly lines. That lifeline is the solitary gravel road winding through the wetlands, the only patch of solid ground capable of supporting the heavy tonnage of the supply trucks desperately needed at the front. Unaware of the lurking danger, a convoy of German Opel Blitz supply trucks rumbles confidently toward the river, their beds laden with precious jerrycans of gasoline and crates of 37mm shells. The drivers are relaxed, chatting over the drone of their engines, believing that the combat zone is miles ahead where the sounds of distant artillery are thundering. To them, this sector is already conquered territory, a safe rear area secured by the invincible Wehrmacht machine that has swept aside all resistance. They drive with their windows down to catch the summer breeze, kicking up a familiar trail of dust that marks their progress to anyone watching from the surrounding hills. Watching is exactly what the Soviet crew inside the KV-2 is doing, their eyes pressed against the periscopes as they observe the approaching column from their commanding position. The tank sits motionless at a critical choke point where the road elevates slightly to pass through a dense patch of forest, creating a natural ambush site with no room for vehicles to maneuver or turn around. The commander of the heavy tank calculates the distance calmly, waiting for the convoy to move deep into the kill zone before giving the order to fire. The massive turret, resembling a rectangular steel barn, does not need to move much. It is already sighted perfectly down the center of the roadway. The silence of the afternoon is shattered by the deafening roar of the 152mm howitzer, a sound so loud it physically shakes the leaves off the nearby birch trees. A high-explosive shell, weighing over 40 kilograms, screams through the air and slams into the lead truck of the German convoy with apocalyptic force. The vehicle simply disintegrates, vanishing in a blinding flash of orange fire and black smoke, scattering burning debris across the entire width of the road. The driver and his passenger are gone in an instant, and the twisted wreckage of the truck frame skids to a halt, forming an impassable burning barricade. Panic erupts instantly down the line of the German convoy as drivers slam on their brakes, tires skidding on the loose gravel, causing trucks to fishtail and collide with one another. Before they can comprehend what has happened, the KV-2 fires again, this time traversing its turret slightly to target the rear of the column to seal the trap. Another explosion rips through the air, destroying the last truck in the line and effectively boxing in the remaining vehicles between two walls of fire. The road has become a slaughterhouse, and the surviving drivers bail out of their cabs, scrambling into the ditches as machine gun fire from the Soviet tank rakes the asphalt. The chaos is absolute as the supply troops, who are not frontline combat infantry, find themselves pinned down by a weapon they cannot even see through the smoke. The KV-2 sits imperiously on the hill, its coaxial machine gun spitting bursts of tracer fire that stitch lines of dust across the road, punishing anyone foolish enough to move. The burning fuel from the destroyed trucks spills into the ditches, forcing the terrified Germans to retreat further into the swampy woodlands, abandoning their precious cargo. The vital supply artery to General Raus's battle group has been severed not by a division, but by a single, immovable object. Word of the ambush travels slowly and confusingly back to the German command post, filtering through as fragmented reports from panicked survivors who managed to escape the kill zone on foot. At first, the officers at the divisional headquarters assume that a major Soviet counterattack has broken through their flank and cut the road in force. They cannot conceive that a single vehicle could halt an entire supply column, So they begin marking maps with red arrows indicating a phantom enemy regiment. The reality, however, is far more embarrassing and dangerous. Their entire operational tempo is being dictated by 5 or 6 men in a metal box. General Raus, waiting impatiently at the bridgehead for the fuel required to continue his advance toward Leningrad, receives the news with a mixture of disbelief and fury. His tanks are running on fumes. His artillery batteries are rationing shells. And now he is told that the road behind him is blocked. The strategic implication is terrifying. If he cannot clear that road, his entire Kampfgruppe will be isolated, surrounded, and eventually destroyed by the converging Soviet armies. He immediately orders a reconnaissance patrol to investigate the blockage and clear it, expecting them to find a squad of partisans or perhaps a broken-down anti-tank gun. The scouts approach the ambush site cautiously, using the tree line for cover, and what they see through their binoculars chills them to the bone. There is no regiment of enemy infantry, no battery of artillery, just one colossal tank sitting amidst the burning wreckage of the convoy like a dragon guarding its hoard. It appears dormant, almost peaceful, until one of the scouts moves too boldly, drawing a burst of machine gun fire that sends them diving for cover. They retreat to report the impossible truth: a monster has taken residence on the road, and it refuses to let anything pass. The geography of the region plays a cruel trick on the Germans, turning the KV-2's position from a nuisance into a strategic catastrophe. The terrain on either side of the road consists of deep, soft marshes and dense forests that are completely impassable for wheeled vehicles and treacherous even for tanks. The road is an embankment, a causeway built over the wetlands, meaning there is physically no way to drive around the obstruction. The Germans are forced to confront the beast head-on, engaging it on the narrow strip of asphalt where the Soviet tank has every advantage. As the sun begins to dip lower, casting long, eerie shadows across the smoke-filled valley, the isolation of the KV-2 crew becomes a profound, silent reality. Inside the tank, the air is foul with propellant fumes and the sweat of men working in a steel oven, but their morale remains unbreakable. They know they are alone, that no help is coming, and that every hour they hold this road is an hour the German army is bleeding. They ration their food, check their remaining ammunition, and take turns watching the periscopes, knowing that the enemy will soon return with something heavier than supply trucks. The German logistical officers are frantic, shouting into field telephones as they try to organize an alternative route, but the maps offer no salvation. Every alternative path is either too narrow, too soft, or leads miles out of the way into unsecured territory teeming with Soviet stragglers. The reality sets in that the 6th Panzer Division has been effectively decapitated from its logistics tail. The flow of food, mail, spare parts, and medical supplies has stopped dead, creating a bottleneck that ripples all the way back to the Prussian border. In a desperate bid to reopen the route before nightfall, a unit of German infantry is sent forward to probe the tank's defenses. Hoping to catch the crew off guard, they move through the tall grass, creeping toward the blind spots of the Iron Giant. But the tank is not a blind beast. The commander inside is vigilant, spotting the movement of the field grey uniforms against the green vegetation. He traverses the turret again, not firing the main gun this time, but using the machine guns to spray the approach, forcing the infantry to keep their heads down in the mud. The psychological impact of the monster of Raseiniai begins to spread through the German ranks like a virus, growing with every retelling of the story. Soldiers whisper about a ghost tank that cannot be killed, a machine that swallows shells and spits fire, guarding the road like Cerberus at the gates of the underworld. This fear is dangerous, eroding the confidence of men who are used to winning, replacing their arrogance with a creeping dread. They look at their own Panzer IIIs and IVs and suddenly feel very small, very vulnerable, and very undergunned. General Raus realizes that this is no longer a minor skirmish to be handled by a rearguard patrol. It is a major tactical crisis requiring his full attention. He is forced to turn his eyes away from the enemy in front of him and focus on the enemy behind him, a reversal that goes against every doctrine of the Blitzkrieg. He orders a battery of 50mm anti-tank guns, his best available assets in the immediate vicinity, to turn around and move back down the road. They are to engage the target at first light, to blast the roadblock out of existence and reopen the lifeline to the division. The crew of the KV-2 watches the sun vanish below the horizon, plunging the battlefield into a darkness illuminated only by the smouldering fires of the destroyed trucks. They eat a cold meal of bread and tinned meat, listening to the sounds of the German preparations in the distance, the clinking of metal and the rumble of tracks. They do not know if they will survive the next day, but they know they have already achieved the impossible. They have stopped an army. The morning of June 24th brings a deceptive calm to the Lithuanian countryside, the early light filtering through the birch trees to reveal a landscape scarred by the previous day's violence. A thick mist clings to the low ground, shrouding the wreckage of the supply trucks in a ghostly white veil. But the hulking silhouette of the KV-2 remains visible, dark and ominous against the pale sky. The German 6th Panzer Division, humiliated by the severance of their supply line, has spent the night organizing a deliberate and lethal response to remove the obstacle. They are done underestimating the threat. This time, they are bringing forward their specialized tank hunters to conduct a surgical execution. A battery of 50mm anti-tank guns, the KV-38 seconds, is being manually manhandled into position by sweating gun crews who move with the practiced silence of hunters stalking prey. These are the Wehrmacht's newest and most effective anti-tank weapons, recently issued to replace the inadequate 37mm guns that had failed so miserably the day before. The crews are confident, veterans of the campaigns in France and Poland, believing that no armor plate in the world can withstand the tungsten-cored shells of their high-velocity cannons. They have been told there is a single heavy tank blocking the road, a target that sits stationary and exposed, practically begging to be destroyed. The battery commander, a seasoned lieutenant, directs his men to position the 4 guns in a semicircle, roughly 600 meters from the Soviet giant. This range is considered point-blank for the KV-38, ensuring high accuracy and maximum penetration while keeping the gun crews low enough in the tall grass to remain unseen. They camouflaged their positions with freshly cut branches and netting, blending perfectly into the forest edge, creating an invisible firing line. Through his binoculars, the lieutenant studies the KV-2, noting its sheer size, which he dismisses as a design flaw, a barn door of a target that his gunners cannot possibly miss. Inside the KV-2, the Soviet crew is awake, bleary-eyed from a restless night of sleeping against cold steel, their bodies aching from the tension of the siege. They have limited visibility through the narrow periscope slits, seeing only the swaying grass and the distant tree line, unaware that 4 barrels are currently being leveled at their turret. They munch on dry crusts of bread, their ears straining for the sound of engines, expecting another convoy or perhaps a tank assault. The silence outside is unnerving, a heavy quiet that suggests the enemy is plotting something far more dangerous than a frontal charge. At the German line, the loaders slide the long, sleek, armor-piercing shells into the breeches of the KV-38 seconds, the metallic clack of the locking mechanisms signaling that the battery is ready. The gunners peer through their optical sights, placing the crosshairs directly on the flat, vertical armor of the KV-2's massive turret, the ideal spot for a kill shot. The lieutenant raises his hand, holding the moment for a heartbeat to ensure all guns are synchronized, before dropping it sharply to signal the order to fire. The command is not spoken, it is a visual chop that unleashes a storm of steel. 4 guns fire in near-simultaneous unison, the sharp crack of the high-velocity rounds splitting the morning air and startling the birds from the trees. Muzzle flashes bloom like angry red flowers in the undergrowth, kicking up dust and leaves as the cannons recoil violently on their carriages. The shells cover the distance in a fraction of a second, appearing as blurring streaks of light to the naked eye before slamming into the target. The German crews watch eagerly, expecting to see the telltale fireball of an ammunition cook-off or the crew bailing out of a burning wreck. The sound of the impact is a heavy, ringing hammer blow that echoes across the valley, but it is not followed by an explosion. Through their optics, the German gunners watch in disbelief as the tracers strike the KV-2 and ricochet wildly into the sky, sparking like fireworks against the grey dawn. The shells, designed to punch through the hardened steel of British and French tanks, have simply shattered or bounced off the Soviet armor. There are no holes, no flames, only small grey gouges in the green paint where the projectiles struck harmlessly, leaving the monster seemingly annoyed rather than injured. "Fire again," the lieutenant screams, his voice cracking with a sudden, rising panic as the reality of the physics unfolding before him defies all his training. The loaders scramble to reload, their hands moving in a blur as they shove fresh rounds into the smoking breeches. Desperate to correct what they assume must be a fluke, the battery opens up with a rapid, continuous rhythm, hammering the tank with round after round, searching for a weak point in the tracks, the turret ring, or the driver's vision port. They hit the tank 8 times, 10 times, a dozen times, the impacts ringing out like a blacksmith working on an anvil. Inside the KV-2, the noise is deafening, a cacophony of terrifying clangs that vibrate the entire chassis and cause dust to rain down from the ceiling. The crew flinches with every impact, their hearts pounding against their ribs, waiting for the inevitable penetration that will kill them all. But as the seconds pass and the hull remains intact, a grim realization dawns on them: they are safe. The commander shouts over the din, ordering the turret to traverse. Realizing that the enemy has revealed their position with the muzzle flashes, the massive electric motor whines into life, and the 152mm gun begins to rotate. From the German perspective, the sight of that turret moving is the stuff of nightmares, a slow, inexorable motion that signals their doom. The gunners fire frantically, abandoning aimed shots for sheer volume, hoping that luck will guide a shell into a vulnerable crevice. But the KV-2 ignores the hail of 50mm slugs as if they were hailstones, its barrel lowering steadily until it points directly at the center of the German battery. The disparity in power is comical and terrifying. The Germans are throwing pebbles at a giant, and the giant is about to throw a boulder back. The KV-2 fires. The concussion of the 152mm howitzer is so powerful that it creates a visible shockwave in the humid air, flattening the grass in a wide radius around the tank. The high explosive shell, weighing as much as a small man, arcs across the field and lands directly amidst the center 2 guns of the German battery. The explosion is cataclysmic, a blinding eruption of earth and fire that tosses the heavy anti-tank guns into the air as if they were made of matchsticks. The blast wave shreds the camouflage netting and kills the crewmen instantly, turning the firing position into a cratered ruin. Panic seizes the surviving German gun crews on the flanks as they realize their position is not just compromised, but suicidal. They attempt to traverse their weapons to fire again, or perhaps to dismantle them and flee. But the shock of the explosion has left them stunned and deafened. Before they can react, the KV-2's loader has already shoved another shell into the breach. The Soviet crew is working with a terrifying efficiency now, fueled by the adrenaline of survival and the knowledge that they are invincible against this specific threat. The second shell screams in, impacting slightly to the right of the first crater, catching the third gun in the battery and obliterating it in a geyser of dirt and metal parts. Shrapnel tears through the trees, cutting down saplings and forcing the remaining infantry support to dive face first into the mud, praying for salvation. The psychological impact is devastating. The German soldiers are watching their most advanced weapons being swatted aside with contemptuous ease. The monster is not just blocking the road, it is actively hunting them, dismantling their offensive power piece by piece. Realizing the battle is lost, the lieutenant orders a full retreat, his voice barely audible over the ringing in his ears. The surviving crews abandon the last remaining gun, leaving it intact in the field as they grab their wounded comrades and scramble back into the safety of the deep forest. They run with the desperation of men who have looked death in the face, leaving behind their equipment, their pride, and their fallen friends. The duel has lasted less than 10 minutes, and the result is a total, humiliating defeat for the anti-tank unit. Silence slowly returns to the clearing, broken only by the crackle of burning ammunition crates and the groans of the dying near the cratered battery. The KV-2 sits motionless once again, its turret smoking slightly, a scarred but unbroken sentinel dominating the high ground. The crew inside takes a moment to breathe, wiping sweat and gunpowder grime from their faces. Looking at the indentations on the interior armor where the German shells had struck, they share a look of disbelief and relief. The steel had held. Back at General Rouse's headquarters, The report of the failed attack arrives like a funeral notice, plunging the command staff into a state of shock. The officers stare at the map, unable to comprehend that a battery of PaK 38 weapons designed to kill tanks has been wiped out by a single vehicle without achieving a single penetration. The logistical crisis is now a tactical emergency. The division is still cut in half, and the enemy blockade has proven immune to standard anti-tank measures. The mood shifts from frustration to a cold, hard fear. General Rouse paces his command tent, realizing that he has run out of conventional options and that time is bleeding away with every hour the road remains closed. He cannot send tanks against it. The 37mm guns of his panzers are even weaker than the anti-tank guns that just failed. He cannot send infantry. The machine guns of the KV-2 will cut them down in the open terrain. He needs something heavier, something designed to destroy aircraft at high altitudes, something with enough velocity to punch through that impenetrable hide. He turns to his artillery officer, his face set in a grim line, and issues the order that everyone has been dreading but expecting. They will bring up the 88mm flak gun. It is a desperate move, using a heavy, immobile anti-aircraft weapon in a direct-fire ground roll, exposing it to enemy fire. But the monster of Raseiniai has left them no choice. If the 88 cannot kill the beast, then nothing in the German arsenal can. The stage is set for a duel of heavyweights, and the outcome will decide the fate of the entire division. The afternoon sun hangs heavy over the battlefield, baking the earth and intensifying the stench of burning rubber and cordite that drifts from the blackened skeletons of the supply trucks. General Erhard Rouse, having exhausted his conventional anti-tank options, plays his final and most dangerous card in a bid to break the stalemate. He orders a heavy 88mm flak gun to be brought forward from the rear echelon, a weapon that has already achieved a mythical status among the troops for its ability to destroy anything it hits. This weapon is technically an anti-aircraft gun, a towering piece of machinery designed to pluck bombers from the stratosphere. But desperation has forced the Wehrmacht to repurpose it as a direct-fire bunker buster. The crew of the 88mm gun moves with a tense, frantic energy, fully aware that they are being asked to perform a suicidal task in broad daylight. They tow the massive gun behind an SD, KV-7 half-track, a powerful prime mover that groans under the weight of the artillery piece as it navigates the cratered, swampy terrain. Their orders are specific and terrifying. They must approach the KV-2 to within 700 meters, unlimber the weapon, level it, and fire before the monster on the hill notices them. They are counting on the thick plumes of black smoke rising from the destroyed truck convoy to act as a visual screen, hiding their approach from the Soviet tank commander. The plan relies entirely on the element of surprise, as the 88mm gun is a large, cumbersome beast that cannot be fired while attached to its towing vehicle. The crew knows that once they stop the half-track, they are committed to a complex deployment sequence that takes precious minutes they may not have. They creep forward through the tree line, the engine of the half-track throttling down to a low rumble to minimize noise. The soldiers scanning the horizon with wide, fearful eyes. They reach the edge of the forest, directly opposite the KV-2, and the commander signals the driver to halt, his heart hammering against his ribs like a trapped bird. Inside the KV-2, the atmosphere is stifling, the temperature rising to unbearable levels as the steel hull absorbs the summer heat like an oven. The crew is exhausted, dehydrated, and deafened by the earlier combat, but their survival instinct keeps them in a state of hyper-vigilance. The commander, peering through his periscope, scans the perimeter constantly, looking for the next threat he knows must be coming. He sees the smoke drifting across the road, the shimmering heat waves, and then, through a momentary gap in the haze, he spots a movement that does not belong to the natural landscape. He squints, adjusting the focus on his optics, and identifies the distinct, angular silhouette of the German half-track emerging from the woods. It is not a tank, nor is it a truck. It is towing something large, something with a long barrel pointing skyward that is slowly being lowered. The realization strikes him instantly. This is not a resupply mission. It is an execution team setting up a heavy gun. He screams the order to his gunner, his voice cutting through the lethargy of the crew, jolting them back into a frenzy of action. The turret traverse motor whines into life once again, fighting against the weight of the massive 152mm gun. On the ground, the German gun crew is working with the frantic desperation of men trying to defuse a bomb with seconds left on the clock. They leap from the half-track, their boots slipping in the mud as they unhook the heavy trails of the gun carriage and begin to crank down the stabilizing outriggers. The process is agonizingly slow. The 88mm is a precision instrument, not a quick reaction weapon, and it fights them every step of the way. The gun commander screams at his men to hurry, glancing over his shoulder to see the terrifying sight of the KV-2's turret slowly rotating toward them like the eye of a predator. "Traverse! Traverse! Faster!" the German sergeant bellows, pushing his men aside to help spin the heavy handwheels that control the gun's horizontal aim. They are trying to level the barrel, to bring the sights to bear on the Soviet tank. But the geometry of the engagement is against them. They are fighting gravity and friction, sweating profusely as they try to align the crosshairs on the green monster that dominates the skyline. They are close, so agonizingly close to being ready. The loader stands with an armor-piercing shell cradled in his arms, waiting for the breach to open, waiting for the chance to kill the beast. But the KV-2 is faster. The Soviet gunner, having already pre-sighted the general area during the earlier engagements, only needs to make a minor adjustment to bring his weapon to bear. The massive rectangular turret stops its rotation with a metallic clunk, the black maw of the 152mm howitzer staring directly at the frantic German crew. There is a moment of absolute horror for the Germans, a frozen second where they look up from their work and realize they have lost the race. The loader drops the shell. The sergeant stops shouting, and they simply stare into the abyss. The KV-2 fires. The muzzle blast is a thunderclap that shakes the leaves from the trees for hundreds of meters, a violent expulsion of gas and flame that signals the end of the duel. The high-explosive shell, filled with pounds of TNT, bridges the 700-meter gap in a heartbeat, traveling on a flat trajectory that leaves no room for error. It does not need to be a precision hit to be effective. The sheer kinetic energy and explosive power of the 152mm round are enough to level a building, let alone an exposed artillery piece. The shell strikes the ground mere feet from the 88mm gun, detonating with the force of a small meteorite impact. The explosion is catastrophic, a blinding flash that instantly vaporizes the center of the German position. The heavy flak gun, weighing over 7 tons, is tossed into the air like a toy, its barrel twisted and mangled by the blast wave. The half-track prime mover is flipped onto its side, its fuel tanks rupturing and igniting a secondary fireball that engulfs the clearing in a roaring inferno. The crew stands no chance. They are gone before the sound of the explosion even reaches the German lines. From the safety of the distant woods, the German infantry support watches in stunned silence as their last hope burns in the field. They see the twisted wreckage of the 88mm gun lying in the mud, a smoking ruin that serves as a monument to their failure. The psychological blow is heavier than the physical loss. The Achtacht, the weapon that was supposed to be invincible, has been destroyed without firing a single shot. The soldiers look at each other with hollow eyes, realizing that the tank on the hill is not just a machine, but a curse that cannot be broken by force of arms. General Raus receives the news via a crackling radio transmission, the voice on the other end trembling with shock and fear. He lowers the handset slowly, his face draining of color as the gravity of the situation settles upon him like a lead weight. He has lost his supply trucks, his anti-tank battery, and now his heavy artillery, all to a single enemy tank that refuses to die. The road remains closed. His division remains cut off, and the sun is beginning to set on a day of unmitigated disaster. The legend of the Raseiniai Monster is growing, feeding on the wreckage of the German army. The Soviet crew inside the KV-2 reloads their gun, the heavy breech block sliding home with a reassuring solidness. They do not cheer, they are too tired for celebration. And the adrenaline crash leaves them shaking and nauseous. They watch the fires burning in the distance, knowing that they have bought themselves another few hours of life, but wondering how long their luck can hold. They have defeated the best the enemy has to offer in a direct confrontation, but they know the Germans are inventive and relentless. The direct approach has failed, so the next attempt will surely be something different. something darker. The battlefield settles into a sullen, smoky twilight, the fires casting long, dancing shadows against the trees. The German commanders withdraw to their maps, arguing in hushed tones about flank attacks, diversions, and air support. Desperate to find a solution to the puzzle, they know they cannot leave the tank there. The entire offensive toward Leningrad depends on this road. They have to kill it, but they can no longer afford to trade equipment for failure. The next plan must be perfect, or the 6th Panzer Division will wither and die on the vine. As night begins to claim the Lithuanian forests, a new order is passed down to the combat engineers. The pioneer, they are the specialists in demolition. Men who work with satchel charges and flamethrowers. Men who do their best work in the dark. If the tank cannot be killed from a distance with guns, it must be killed up close with human hands. The battle of the giants is over. The battle of the shadows is about to begin. Night descends upon the Lithuanian countryside like a heavy woolen blanket, smothering the fires of the burning supply trucks until they are nothing but glowing red embers in the dark. The battlefield, which had been a cacophony of explosions and screaming engines just hours before, now settles into a profound and unsettling silence. The moon is obscured by heavy clouds, plunging the valley into near total darkness. A tactical void where vision is reduced to mere shadows and movement is betrayed only by sound. For the men of the 6th Panzer Division, this darkness offers no rest, only a terrifying amplification of their fears regarding the steel monster that still blocks their only road to victory. In the makeshift command post, the atmosphere is thick with frustration and cigarette smoke as officers hunch over maps illuminated by shielded lanterns. The failure of the 88mm gun has shaken them to their core, proving that brute force from a distance is insufficient to dislodge the Soviet Leviathan. General Raus knows that he cannot wait for dawn to try again. The pressure from Berlin to advance is relentless, and every hour of delay allows the Red Army to strengthen its defenses further east. He turns to his last resort for the night, the pioneer, the combat engineers who specialize in demolition, mine clearing, and close-quarters destruction. A special detachment of 12 men is selected for the mission. Volunteers who are stripped of their heavy gear and armed only with pistols, grenades, and massive satchel charges. These charges are bundles of high explosives lashed together, designed to shatter concrete bunkers or sever steel girders, and they are the only man-portable weapons capable of scratching the KV-2. The leader of the squad, a grim-faced lieutenant, briefs his men in whispers, outlining a plan that requires them to crawl literally up to the metal skin of the beast. They blacken their faces with engine grease and soot, transforming themselves into shadows, preparing to hunt a dragon with their bare hands. The approach begins shortly after midnight, the engineers moving into the tall grass with the slow, deliberate patience of vipers slithering through the undergrowth. They move on their bellies, dragging the heavy explosive charges behind them, feeling for tripwires or dry twigs that might snap and give away their position. The air is cool and damp, filled with the smells of the swamp and the lingering, metallic scent of the day's violence. To their left, the forest is a wall of blackness. To their right, the road rises up like an altar, atop which sits the silhouette of the KV-2. Every sound in the night feels amplified 1,000 times to the crawling men. The chirp of a cricket sounds like a scream, and the rustle of the wind in the birch trees sounds like enemy footsteps. They stop every few yards to listen, their hearts hammering against the wet earth, straining to hear any movement from the tank crew. The KV-2 appears dead, a dark monolith against the sky, showing no lights and making no sound. But the Germans know the crew is inside, likely awake and terrified, clutching their weapons. The psychological weight of creeping toward a machine that has already destroyed a battery of artillery is crushing. Finally, the lead engineer reaches the gravel embankment of the road, the loose stones digging into his elbows as he pulls himself up the slope. He is now so close that he can smell the oil and grease on the tank's tracks, a mechanical scent that overrides the smell of the swamp. He signals the others forward, and they cluster around the rear of the tank, hidden in the blind spot of the massive turret. They are now touching the enemy, their hands pressing against the cold steel of the hull, placing their charges on the tracks and against the rear engine deck. The tension is excruciating as the engineers work to set the fuses, their fingers trembling slightly as they manipulate the delicate igniters in the pitch black. They place a double charge on the left track, hoping to immobilize the beast permanently, and another massive bundle on the barrel of the 152mm gun, aiming to shatter the weapon. The lieutenant checks the work of his men by touch, ensuring the explosives are tamped down tight against the armor to maximize the directional force of the blast. He pulls the pin on the first fuse, hearing the distinct, terrifying hiss of the chemical igniter starting its burn. "Go, go," he whispers urgently, and the squad scrambles back down the embankment, abandoning their stealth for speed as they race toward the safety of the drainage ditch. They dive into the mud, covering their heads with their arms, counting the seconds in their heads as the fuses burn down. Inside the tank, the crew hears the sudden scuffling of boots on gravel and the strange thumping on their hull, realizing too late that they have been boarded. But before they can react or traverse the turret, the night is torn apart. The explosion is a blinding white flash that momentarily turns the night into day, followed instantly by a concussion that hits the retreating engineers like a physical punch. The sound is deafening, a sharp crack that rolls across the valley and echoes off the distant hills, waking every soldier within 5 miles. Debris rains down from the sky, clods of dirt, gravel, and shards of metal pattering against the helmets of the hiding Germans. For a moment, there is silence, and the engineers dare to hope that the nightmare is finally over. Smoke drifts thick and heavy across the road, obscuring the target. But as the wind slowly clears the haze, the engineers peer over the lip of the ditch. They expect to see a burning wreck, a shattered hull split open like a ripe melon. But what they see freezes the blood in their veins. The KV-2 is still there. It is not burning. It is not destroyed. The massive charges, enough to bring down a bridge, have detonated against the armor. But the machine remains fundamentally intact, a dark shape looming in the smoke. The lieutenant, unwilling to believe his eyes, crawls forward again to inspect the damage, risking death to confirm the result. He finds that the charge on the gun barrel has done nothing but scorch the paint and leave a shallow dent in the thick steel. The charge on the tracks has been more effective, snapping a few links and damaging the drive sprocket, effectively immobilizing the tank, but the hull is unbreached. The armor of the Kliment Voroshilov is simply too thick. The explosion had followed the path of least resistance, blasting outward into the air rather than inward into the fighting compartment. Suddenly, the tank wakes up with a vengeance. The crew inside, recovering from the concussion of the blast and realizing they are under close assault. The coaxial machine gun erupts, spitting a long tongue of flame into the darkness, the bullets tearing up the earth where the engineers had been just moments before. The turret begins to traverse with a menacing whine, searching for the attackers, turning the area around the tank into a kill zone. The Soviet crew begins throwing hand grenades out of the hatches, the small explosions adding to the chaos on the road.